Let's see where we left off. Since I had started driving at 16, I'd had a morning coffee habit. In high school, on my way to class, I'd ritually stop at 7-Eleven to get a 32-ounce cup of coffee, filled not quite to the top to leave room for flavored non-dairy creamers, French vanilla, vanilla caramel, hazelnut. I'd pour them cupful by tiny cupful until the bitter junk that passed for coffee smelled like a candy shop. The irony of getting the greatest percentage of my daily caloric intake from non-dairy creamers was lost on me at the time, and each morning I kept myself awake in history, social studies, and other 8 o'clock classes by the virtue of 32 ounces of caffeine. As I got older, and gourmet coffee became as ubiquitous as frozen yogurt, my tastes got more nuanced. By the time Starbucks opened in Palo Alto, I'd graduated to triple soy lattes, a huge cup of hot, frothing soy milk with 3, sometimes 4, shots of espresso, and it was the perfect antidote to collegiate sleepless nights and drowsy afternoons. Before arriving in India, I had never tasted Nescafe. The idea of powdered coffee was beneath me. I spoke fluent French, vacationed on the Champs-Élysées, don't know if I'm pronouncing that French name right, and in Chamonix, and spent summers in Chailly-sur-Lausanne, where there was no place in my affected self-identity for instant coffee. Then I came to northern India, where if you want to drink coffee, Nescafe it is. In fact, what passes for coffee in India is much closer to melted coffee ice cream than to any serious stimulant. Tiny spoonfuls of brown powder are mixed into sugary milk, sometimes fresh. Sometimes the milk is powdered too. In a fancy setting, one might get a flaking of additional coffee powder sprinkled gingerly on top of the white foam. It was wonderful, of course, as melted Haagen-Dazs coffee ice cream would be. But it was not the coffee in the I need to wake up sense. Hence, I quickly developed and perfected a morning ritual. The man at the local chai shop would give me triple the serving of Nescafe for only quadruple the cost. Therefore, instead of paying 5 rupees for a cup of mildly coffee-fragranced sweet milk, I paid 20 rupees for the heaping spoonfuls 3 of Nescafe in my steaming milk. It was bitter and unpalatable, but at least offered the fix of coffee. I soon discovered that by stirring heaping spoonfuls of sugar into the concoction, I could drink it without gagging. So my morning ritual was set. After morning prayers, I walked to the marketplace, where 50 yards down, the chaiwala greeted me with an enthusiastic "Namaste." He sat cross-legged on a raised wooden platform in front of the small cafe. In front of him brewed a vat of tea, into which he periodically dropped more loose leaves or another ladle full of milk from an uncovered pot nearby. He and I, even without a shared language, had worked out a routine. He would remove the huge vat of chai from the single gas burner and, in its place, put a small pot of milk. As the milk came to a boil, he poured once, twice, then 3 times from the small packet of Nescafe. He then picked up a large steel glass, twice the size of the tiny glasses that most people drink tea or coffee from, and poured the properly brown beverage into the cup which he had handed me with a flourish. I smiled and thanked him, handed him 20 rupees with a heartfelt Hindi "Dhanyavad," and took my coffee to sit on the steps leading to the Ganga. The cool marble steps on the banks of the holy river were mostly empty at that hour of the day. Ritual bathers were already gone, and those for whom sunshine was more important than tradition hadn't arrived yet. So from 6 to 6:30 in the morning, just after sunrise but not yet warm, it was remarkably quiet, populated by those in meditation and prayer rather than splashing bathers. I sat on the higher steps, careful not to bring coffee into the sacred area of prayer and puja, which means worship in Sanskrit. Once lips have touched food, drink, or utensil, it's considered juta, unfit for another, and certainly not fit to be in a place of worship. Mindful not to offend cultural sensitivities, I sat high on the steps, watching the morning mist dissipate into the rays of the rising sun as they danced on the waters of the river. That morning, the coffee was purely medicinal, so rather than walk to the banks of the Ganga and sip it meditatively, I sat on a bench at the cafe behind my friend, the chaiwala, so as to not waste time walking to and from the river. I drank my coffee Indian style to finish it quickly, pouring small amounts from the tall steel glass into a little bowl, swirling the bowl to cool it, then drinking from the bowl. With 4 or 5 cooled bowlfuls, I emptied the cup, handed it back to the chaiwala, smiled, cooed dhanyavad earnestly, and walked quickly back to the ashram. The clock tower in front of Paramarth showed 6:20 as I entered Pujiya Swamiji's outer sitting room, my new guru. The door to the large room was unlocked, so I entered completely alone save for the orange carpet and a painting of Lord Krishna directly above the saffron cushion. I had just sat on the floor next to the Magic Kingdom door when, suddenly, it opened and a boy's head appeared. "Why are you here?" he asked in a way that might seem accusatory, but probably reflected only the limits of his English vocabulary. I froze. Maybe it was all a mistake. I was a fool. Swamiji hadn't really said he would see me privately. I had only imagined it. I was delusional, and now I'd been found out. I couldn't speak. I looked down at my covered feet and felt my face flush with shame. "You are here to see Swamiji, I think," he said. I nodded abashedly. He smiled. "Come here," he said and held open the door. I jumped up and followed him excitedly, hesitating briefly in the doorway to savor the moment I crossed the threshold. This is a new word for me, L-I-T-H-E, the lithe young man led me into a room with windows facing Swamiji's garden. The rays of the morning sun were beginning to stream through the glass. In one corner next to the windows was a large desk painted pink and topped with elegant translucent black glass. There were several piles of papers and files lined up and stacked neatly on the window side of the desk. Behind the desk was a large chair covered in a floral pattern that matched the couch on the opposite wall. Facing the desk were 3 smaller chairs, also covered with the same floral print. "Sit here," he instructed me, motioning to a rug on the floor at the foot of the couch. I sat obediently, facing an empty couch. "Swamiji will come soon," he declared, and then departed, closing the door behind him. Moments passed. Many of them. I could faintly hear voices coming from some other part of the complex, but could not decipher anything. I was suddenly conscious of the ridiculousness of how I had gotten there and where I was. I was sitting alone on a soft Persian rug at the foot of an empty couch, waiting for a man in orange robes I didn't know to arrive. And then what? All the anticipation leading up to the special meeting. I never thought about what the meeting might be about. Damn, I berated myself. You should have thought of something to talk about. He'll think you're an idiot. He's given you this incredible opportunity to meet him privately and you don't have anything to say. My heart plummeted into my stomach. Maybe he's forgotten about me, I finally thought, with some relief. Of course, he's busy. How and why would he possibly remember that he told me to come see him? I'm sure he's doing something more important. I looked around and suddenly felt like a trespasser. How dare I think I'm supposed to be in this sacred room, clearly reserved for those much more worthy than me? Pronounced lithe, says Dr. Ginny. It means thin and graceful. Thank you, my poet friend. As I was about to stand and leave, the door flew open and Swamiji entered. Yes, he said. It was not a question, but an answer, perhaps, to some unasked question. Yes, he repeated as he sat on the couch. Tell me. The anxiety of not having anything to say vanished. I still had nothing to say, but felt no agitation about it. It felt absolutely perfect to sit there with him, at his feet, on the rug, in silence. He looked at me, and I knew he could see everything. Finally, words began to come. Swamiji, I whispered, wondering where the rest of my voice had gone. I feel so blessed to be here, so blessed to be having these life-changing experiences. I don't understand what is happening, but it's so beautiful. I feel so blessed. I would like to give back in some way, to do something. I looked up at him, and he was staring into my eyes wordlessly. Is there anything I can do? I repeated. He continued to look into my eyes, and I felt his presence inside me. I knew that he had entered the core of myself. He knew everything and could see everything inside me. It was not frightening or embarrassing. In fact, it was the most soothing and comforting experience I could imagine, as though my heart and mind, my darkness and anxieties were plunged into a warm bubble bath. He smiled as his eyes bored through mine. Finally, he spoke. Anything? It took me a moment to remember what he was talking about. Oh yes, I had asked if there was anything I could do. We sat in his office, a separate personal room, entry to which was restricted to one or two of the boys and occasional person blessed, as I had been, to be granted permission to sit there. There was no question of being interrupted or someone walking in unannounced. Swamiji had only known me for only a few days and was fully aware that I did not know anyone else in the ashram or in any circles of his devotees or disciples. Our worlds did not overlap at all. He could tell that I had no idea what a Hindu saint was, what it meant, what the rules and restrictions might be. He was the first saffron-robed man I had ever seen, let alone spoken to. And of course he knew that I was intoxicated with bliss, floating through my days, my consciousness immersed in an ocean of incomprehensible ecstasy. We sat, I, a 25-year-old temporarily incoherent American student, and he, a 44-year-old renunciant whose life of celibacy had begun before he even understood what he was renouncing. And I had just offered him anything. Anything? He questioned again, and continued to look not into but fully through my eyes. What was he seeing? Yes, anything, I whispered, the rest of my voice still absent. Suddenly, into the state of stillness, into the state of surrendering my darkest corners and deepest secrets to his loving gaze, into the state of ecstatic openness, I heard my mother's voice. It was stern and sharp. Just get up and walk out. She was now here in my brain, watching me sit on the floor at the feet of a man old enough to be my father in a far-off corner of the world, offering him anything. "Just stand up and walk out right now," she instructed again, forcefully, as though I were a toddler refusing to leave the toy store. "Just leave. Now." I smiled at how her voice had found me even thousands of miles away, and how of course she'd be worried. Maybe there really was something to worry about, but oddly, none of it mattered. I knew that without any doubt, yes, I would give him anything, whatever he wanted. I nodded again to make sure Swamiji knew that yes, I was fully his, fully eager to be taken and utilized in whatever way he wanted. "Do you promise?" he asked. I raised my eyes again to see him staring down at me, unblinking. My mother's shrill voice was now joined by the voice of Dr. Phil Zimbardo, expert on cults, mind control, and brainwashing. I had been one of the only students in his decades-long career at Stanford to get an A+ in his standing room only psychology of mind control class. Dr. Zimbardo's voice now bellowed through my brain as well. And I have to pause the alarm on my phone 1 second. Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay, we're back. I could hear Dr. Zimbardo's voice now bellowing through my brain as well. "You know better than this. You must leave the room right now. Be strong, gather your wits about you, and just leave." His steady voice contrasted sharply with my mom's, which had reached a frantic crescendo. "Leave, for God's sake, just stand up and leave." I could hear and recognize both their voices, but they were unable to affect me. They seemed to be slightly loud background music, a grating audio track in an otherwise heavenly film. While aware of them, I was not touched. "Yes, of course. I promise," I spoke, leaving my mother and Dr. Zimbardo in a far-off corner of my consciousness. As I looked at Swamiji, having promised him anything, the seriousness of his gaze broke and he smiled. "Okay, 3 things. First, I want you to get closer and closer to God every day. Every day, a little closer. Second, serve humanity. You've been given so much. Use it to serve the world. Third," he paused, and his gaze spread and opened to envelop every cell that had ever been part of who I was, holding the me who had been, the me who was now, and the me who I was yet to become in the ocean of his eyes. He said, "Third, be happy. I do not want to ever see you sad. If you have any sadness, give it to me." He held out his cupped hands as though begging not for bread, but for my pain. I do not know at what point the tears began to flow from my eyes. I became aware of them only when his now outstretched hands picked up the washcloth next to him and he leaned over to wipe my face with it. "By the way," he said, "can you type?" And that's the end of chapter 10, where we'll stop reading for now. So thank you for listening. And I hope to continue this journey with you as we read next time.